This has been something major that's going in the history books for sure.
Definitely been a life-changing experience, I would say, as a journalist going through this pandemic here in New Orleans.
This has actually taken a huge toll on my mental health. It's been pretty crazy. I think as a journalist, you go into every story obviously wanting to put the most into it, but this is something that's also affecting us. So every day, I think for me, it's been kind of a mental struggle because I've also had to come to the realization that this is also affecting me. This is also impacting my family. And so I think that mentally, this has actually taken a huge toll. I mean, none of us thought, when I left to go home and not go back to the office in March, I was like, oh, this will be over in like 2 months. And it wasn't. As a Latina, but also covering like the Navajo Nation, seeing communities of color being disproportionately affected by this pandemic has been really tough.
And we're like an island, the Navajo Nation. So of course, if you have record-breaking numbers all around us, it will come in to that nation or that area. And that's what's happening today.
From March, I've been covering the Navajo Nation pretty consistently. You're wanting to give them a voice and give them a platform, but also there is this virus and you're being impacted as well, but also you're seeing your own people being impacted at way higher rates. And I don't feel like enough coverage is being done on those communities.
We're in need. We need help, and we're not getting it.
As a journalist, I want my community to know that I am here to cover them. I am here to give them a voice. But it's hard because I feel like when you look specifically at the Navajo Nation, which are the country's first people, these are people who've always, unfortunately, lived in third world conditions. But now what did this pandemic do? Well, it highlighted that, right? Like it's highlighting these racial injustices. I mean, this is pretty much, you could say it's historical trauma, right? And that historical trauma that these communities have experienced is now being highlighted on a grander span.
The Navajo Nation became one of the first groups in the country to begin COVID-19 vaccine trials.
Even when you look at the vaccine now, I think because of the historical things that have happened in this country, there's a lot of mistrust for healthcare workers who even work on the reservation. And I think just in general, there's mistrust amongst the government, unfortunately, and healthcare because of the historical traumas or the experimental events that have happened on these communities before. The one thing that I consistently hear is just, again, like the government, murdered and massacred our people. Like, how are we supposed to trust this government that did these things to natives?
The reason why we did it was to bring confidence to the vaccine. And I know people were saying, well, we're not going to take it unless you take it, President. Okay, I took it.
It's growing that relationship. It's building that foundation with these communities that these people need, right? And so I think that, when we look at the Navajo Nation, I've come to realize that one of the difficult things for Native doctors is that extra layer of them having to do the work to remind their people that, yes, I am a doctor and I'm Navajo, but I'm here to help you and I'm not here to hurt you. To be able to cover this community to the extent we were able to cover it and to highlight some of the positives, to highlight, when they were able to curb the spread of the virus, to when they got their first vaccines. It's been an honor. I mean, one of the biggest honors of my life.
We have gotten hit hard by this pandemic, and we're looking forward to seeing the numbers decrease as we get more and more of our Navajo citizens vaccinated.
What I'm going to remember is the relationship that I built with this nation of our country. And I think that when covering any community, whether it's the Black community, the Latino community, the Asian community, you have to build trust in these communities. And looking back on this, what I'm going to take away is that relationship that I built with the Navajo Nation and how they trusted me. And as these months went on, I've become like the Navajo Nation reporter. I started this relationship with President Nez and more of the officials and the leaders. And I was able to give justice to this community. And not only that, but shine light on the positives of this community as well. I am happy knowing that I did what I could to bring change to these areas. Looking back now at my last 2.5 years, it's just one of the biggest honors of my life was being able to cover the nation this closely. And not only that, but to have them accept me and invite me in.
We've done 15 tests total. 14 of those have come back negative. This obviously being the only one that came back positive.
My earliest memory of the pandemic, or when COVID was starting to become real, I was at the state capitol in Baton Rouge, and it was the first COVID case that had been confirmed. And I had been hearing that there was a COVID case in our area. So I had remember kind of finding the press secretary to confirm this information. And in fact, it was in our area. So that was one of the first cases or the first memories that I have. And then here we are in 2021. Who would have imagined the amount of deaths and cases that have been across the world? One of the most important things that I personally thought was critical and crucial during this pandemic was to find the people that have been hit hardest by the pandemic. Some of the stories that I told, or some of the people that I met, it was mind-boggling. I remember we were about midway through the pandemic, a couple months in, and there was a mother and her 3 sons all died. They had their services together and all of them tested positive for COVID. Those were the stories that I thought were crucial, involving people that had experienced firsthand the devastation of COVID-19. I can think of 3 to 4 husband and wives that have passed away because of COVID. So yeah, it is challenging, but I think you're here to show that this is a reality that so many people are dealing with, and that's your job to effectively communicate that to the public. You meet so many people along the way, and there's so much heartbreak, but there is a little bit of hope. While there has been so many deaths, there has been a lot of survivors, thousands and thousands of survivors. So it is important to tell those stories. A story that really moved me a lot was the story involving a 22-year-old girl who had special needs and accomplished her dream of graduating high school.
Oh no! Asia Garrison, all smiles and full of joy. She and hundreds of her fellow Cardinals were honored through a drive-through ceremony at Poletti'S High School.
She, despite all of this, was so positive. There was no graduation. It was like a drive-through thing. And so many kids were disappointed, but her story of being 22 years old and being able to accomplish her dream was pretty incredible.
Never giving up, having faith, and when times get hard, keep the ones you love most close to your heart.
I got so many comments and texts from people that it was something that they needed. It lifted them up in the middle of this pandemic. Stories like that, I think, really were also important too. We've also done a lot of stories about music. The heartbeat of New Orleans is music, and musicians are what makes New Orleans such a great city. And there's been multiple musicians that I've spoken to that have had to get on unemployment or try to get on unemployment. It's not the same.
Working out of my savings now. I am on unemployment, but it's like that only goes so far, and it's gonna apparently end soon.
So there's no place for them to really perform how they used to. So they're struggling all across America, but here in New Orleans, they've been hit very hard.
The 2 testing sites in Palm Beach County have reopened their phone lines this morning to begin scheduling appointments.
At first, when the pandemic started, we knew it was a big story. And as a journalist, most people know when big stories happen, you're covering it every day. But this has been a nonstop thing for over a year now. As a journalist, you're writing part of history, and you get to tell the stories that are happening as they happen. One of the most important things that I feel that I have covered so far through the process has been the first few vaccines.
About 2,400 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine will be administered between today and tomorrow here at the Mid-Florida Credit Union Event Center in Port St. Lucie. This is only for people over the age of 65, as well as healthcare workers who are pre-registered with appointments.
When we first started to get those doses, within the counties that we cover, I got the opportunity to go to different hospitals and see them administer those vaccines to the doctors and the nurses and the staff, which were a priority in our state here in Florida. But I just felt like that was such an honor and a neat thing to be a part of, and it really makes you appreciate your job, regardless of all these things that are going on. Those are important topics to cover and information that is necessary to, provide for the public. I'm asthmatic, and when I do get sick, I just have a history of always getting bronchitis and having those lung issues. In general, a small cold typically really affects me. So I knew that if I got COVID, it wouldn't be good for me. So I was super careful. But I remember it was a Friday, right before our 4th of July weekend. I thought I had allergies. It was a work day. By the end of the day, I started to feel really tired. I work morning shifts, so I thought, okay, well, maybe I just had a long day. By the time I woke up Saturday morning, my whole body just ached and hurt. I've never felt like that before. Sometimes people describe it as the flu with the body aches. I've had the flu before. This was a totally different feeling. When I say body aches, I mean your body just aches. It was so hard for me to get out of bed. And I knew in that moment that I had it. I started to get a fever that Saturday night, and I called my boss and I let her know right away. I was quarantined immediately. The people that I was around, I obviously notified them right away. Luckily, nobody around me got it except me, but it was hard. After the fever, the body aches, I had trouble breathing. There were nights where I almost thought that, I'm like, Josie, maybe you're having a panic attack, because I would wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air. I ended up getting an oximeter reader for my finger, and my levels were pretty low. So I ended up going to the hospital, and I stayed there for a little. They monitored me. And when I came back home, I think I just realized how lucky I was that even what I got wasn't as bad as what some people are experiencing. I see things differently now. And when I go into my stories and I hear other people's experiences, I think that I have a lot more compassion for people and a lot more understanding for what they're going through.
In a time when the events taking place across our country can feel quite heavy, it's moments like this that are worth celebrating.
And there are positive stories that we do get to cover. And the most recent one that I covered is Boca Regional Hospital released their 1,000th COVID patient from the ICU, which was a huge step for them. There are big things that happen all the time, but this has been something major that's going in the history books for sure. And to have spent the last year covering this, it's something that I'm never going to forget. I know it's something I'm probably one day going to be sharing with my kids. And it's been an honor to also be able to help people. What I do every day is try to get all of the accurate information to the public. And so during this time, it has been so important to be able to do that. And I know it's something that I will never forget, to have been a part of all of it and to help the people in my community.
Reporting in Jupiter, Josie Carbonari, WPBF 25 News.
Reporting, I'm Aubrey Killian, WDSU News.
Reporting in Albuquerque, Marissa Armas, KOAT Action 7 News.